want to thank you all for joining. Nate Wenzler, the Chief Security Strategist for Tenable, speaking on improving your security strategy. Nate, if you wouldn't mind taking to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Want to have a conversation a little bit about the challenges that we often see with security teams trying to make better decisions around mitigating risk and really about communicating it throughout the organization. We at Tenable, for those of you who may not be familiar, are the creators of Nessus and have been in the vulnerability management space now for almost 25 years. So we have a bit of a interesting insight into the ways that organizations have been trying to mitigate risk from patches and misconfigurations and all that for a long time. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time about that, though. What I'd like to do today is really get into the ways that people leverage this information to speak to different audiences within their organizations. It's something that I've spent a lot of my career as a former CISO and as a consultant for large companies about trying to help them understand that when we're trying to mitigate risks in our environment, we do get pulled in a lot of different directions, but we can streamline that process so that we can get our technical folks, our management folks, the non-technical people involved, all kind of on the same page, talking about risk in the same way, so that we can, as an organization, make better decisions about how, when, and where we're going to try to address these challenges. So that's really my goal today. I'll talk a little bit about that problem and some suggestions on how to solve it. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. So, when I start to think about the problem as we look at it today, I think about where security as a function sits within a lot of organizations. Now, this is just a kind of a sample I pulled together, not meant to be definitive. In this example, I've got the CISO here underneath the CIO, but we commonly see the CISO now directly under the CEO or even under general counsel or the CFO sometimes, depending on the organization. But just for example's sake, I have it here under the technology org. It is still a pretty common place. And as the security teams function in the org, you can kind of just follow the challenges that the team has to deal with when you think about the different ways that leadership in a security team gets pulled. Now, I can talk about my own experiences and where I got pulled in my organizations in a previous life, kind of walk you through how my days usually went. And we'll see how much this resonates and it seems familiar to the rest of you. I'm based here on the West Coast, and I worked for a company that was headquartered on the East Coast. And so, as you might imagine, my days started pretty early. And they almost always started very early with a call from my CEO, who would reach the newspapers or news articles before I did, and would be sending me messages about, hey, just saw this other company got hit with another piece of ransomware. Are we next? Well, no matter what I had planned for my day, whatever I was going to sit down with my team to try to solve, whether I like it or not, I just got prioritized into what I was going to do for the day, which is answering the question, are we next? Are we going to be in the newspapers? So, okay, I'll respond, let the CEO know that I'm on it. We'll get the team moving. We're going to try to identify which assets might be vulnerable and pull together a report by midday, maybe, who knows, to try to answer that question. Are we susceptible to this new piece of ransomware? Now, of course, while I'm juggling with that and trying to get my team moving, I get an email from the CFO, and the CFO is asking me, hey, you requested another couple $100,000 in budget for some new tools and an extra position. I need to understand why. And now I've got to flip into that mode to justify why I needed this money and why I needed the new position. And I need to explain it in a way that the financial officer understands and not just the standard I'm understaffed and need more tools. So now I'm going to spend some time speaking in finance language to try to help get that budget passed. And of course, then I get pinged by legal, who says, we're talking about moving operations into Europe. And we understand that there is this privacy regulation, this GD something PR thing. Gosh, are we going to be susceptible to that? Do we need to care? It's a good question, but now I've got to stop and reread that piece of legislation and make sure that I can answer those questions from a legal standpoint to help them understand whether or not we have to partake in that privacy regulation. And my day's not even started. This might be the first hour. Of course, the sales team in my organization, I work for a software company, they're going to bring me into any conversation they can with a customer to talk about our security practices. Do we have a SOC 2 report? Have we done all of our due diligence to make sure our software is safe? And of course, compliance is always a thing. I have to run those teams and help them make sure that we're meeting PCI compliance, SOX compliance, all of the things that we normally have to do from a technical standpoint, but purely for the auditors. And of course, as any good software company is doing their due diligence, I work with product management to make sure that the features we're building into our products are secure, that we are doing good coding practices, that we're not building features that expose the data set. Of course, now that I think about that, I also better make sure marketing is giving the right message, that they are not getting us ahead of our skis, that they're talking about our products in the right way. And quite frankly, marketing also is going to tap me to come and do, well, things like this, to spread the good word about what our companies are doing and talk about security to audiences to help educate and help people understand the problem. Of course, I work with my dev teams as well to help instill those coding practices that they need to do to make sure our product is sound. And that's all on top of the normal day-to-day stuff of just getting patch management information over to the sysadmins about the various things that they need to fix on their servers. And really, it's not just the sysadmins, it's the whole IT organization at any given day to make sure that we're doing our Active Directory management correctly, we're securing identities, we are scanning our web applications for vulnerabilities and getting those remediated, and all the other work that happens there. And this is barely before lunch. This is, in many ways, the world that all of us live in security. And this should seem familiar to all of you. I don't think this is a revelation, but it speaks to the heart of where security lives in an organization. We're a very unique kind of organization. Think about almost any other group. If I worked in accounts receivable in finance, there's one area of the world that I need to be an expert in, and that's how to process payments and accounts in a financial world. That's my area of expertise. That's what I can focus on. But in security, we get pulled in all of these different directions because we're seen by the other groups in the organization as sort of experts in the field in all these different things. And to some extent, that is true. Because when you think about what security really is, security is not actually an IT function in an organization. We're not technologists. We are properly a risk management function. We are more aligned with finance and legal, really, than we are with technology. And when you look at how all of these different groups are trying to address risk from their own points of view, all of it intersects with technology. And that's why we get pulled in so many different directions, trying to answer these very difficult questions in different ways, because this is where we're starting to be seen in more and more organizations. Where this becomes difficult, though, is what you're seeing on the screen, is sort of the chaos of being pulled individually in all these different ways, and that we have to try to explain security in such a way that is organized, that is well thought out, but quite frankly, it just doesn't always work that way. So when I try to put together sort of a list of what it is we do and put it in front of people about the various tasks at play, this is just a small list of what I came up with. But I'll ask all of you this, and I'm happy to see some answers in the chat if you'd like. On a given day, one single day, how many of you in your day-to-day work do at least 6 of these things in a given day? And if any of you do 9 to 12, I'd love to hear that too. I'll give it just a second here if you want to put that in the chat and add into the conversation, but be curious to see how many of you find normally you're doing 6, 9, 12 of these things on a given day. See probably
Dr.
around 8,
Blake,
see some
Dr.
agreement
Blake,
there.
This says probably around 8.
Yeah, that seems the 6 to 9 range is pretty common for what I hear. This is tough. It's really tough. This is exactly the problem, right? When we we try to focus on a problem, um, we can't, right? And we have to be able to switch and pivot to different types of areas of expertise and talk about them in different ways, meeting to meeting sometimes, right? So all of you look at this list and you're all saying 5, 6, 8, 9 different tasks in a given day. Even at 8, that's one of these tasks an hour, assuming you're not interrupted by anything else. That's really hard. It's really, really hard to focus. And that's the problem that we need to try to solve. So this is why when I talk about how we're wearing a lot of hats, and someone at the very top of this said how relevant that was, this is what I'm talking about, right? We are trying to be kind of all things to all people because, frankly, we're still finding our place in a lot of organizations. This idea that security is a risk management function is still relatively new. We are still seen as kind of the IT hacker types in a lot of ways. And that is part of our role. But more and more, as organizations start to realize how important technology is to their business, how every single thing they do lives on top of some piece of technology today, we get brought in to be financial experts, communication wizards. We have to be educators. We have to be somewhat up on top of all the legal issues that are going on, compliance and new regulations. We are business risk assessment people. Like, that is the core of what we're doing. So you're getting pulled in all these directions. We have to be seen as experts in all of these things. And this is something I dealt with personally. I advise companies a dozen times about how to deal with this. And I think what I started to find was where we can sort of normalize some of these conversations into smaller categories. If we can take away some of the complexity about how we look at risk, how we talk about risk, then we can at least simplify this part of the problem, right? We still have to address all the different issues, but we can at least try to normalize a little bit of how we communicate to the different areas of the organization about risk. So what I've done and I've used in the past is this very simple framework. Again, I don't want to say revolutionary or anything like that. It's not, but it's a simple kind of clean framework that I've used to help people understand the kinds of conversations we're having around risk and the kinds of decisions that happen at each level. If you break this out into thinking about all the conversations as really having 3 different levels. There's an executive level of conversation and decision-making. There's a strategic level and a tactical level. Now, what's listed here, again, not absolute. These are examples. And I think the key thing that I want everyone to take away from this is any one of these positions at any given time may have to communicate or make decisions at one of the other 3 levels. But when a CEO, as an example, is acting in that capacity, they are making executive level decisions. A CISO who has to manage a security team, right? They generally are making executive level type decisions, big picture decisions that affect the entire organization, but they're also managing strategic and tactical level people. They may have to sometimes get down in the weeds and try to have those conversations with tactical folks to get them on board with the program, to help get movement. How many times have we heard, I can't patch something, that's my system and I don't want to reboot it. Well, sometimes it's the CISO has to come down and have that conversation. We move through these different levels no matter what position we are in an organization, but I wanted to visualize the kinds of positions at each level that you're probably going to see. So I'm going to pause here for a second before I go into this a little bit more. The next few steps here, I'm going to break down what each of these levels mean, the challenges, and some recommendations about how to better help these different levels talk to each other. And at the end of this, I'll show you an example, one of many, that maybe we'll put it into some perspective for you. But for now, I want to pause for a second and see if Sean, if there's any questions or comments or anything that someone might want to converse about here.
Yeah, a few comments. Jake Keinholz, he said, in regards to your previous slide of all the different responsibilities, I don't know anybody in our position that can get to all of these, even if we worked an 80-hour work week. Very true. Dr. Blake Curtis says, very true, Jake. It's more like a window dressing than anything. And a few people requested a copy of this presentation afterwards.
We can definitely help with that. No question about getting the copy there.
Yeah.
We'll work with the sync folks to make sure that gets back out to all of you who are interested. No problem. Yeah, I will actually say the idea about a lot of this is window dressing. There is a truth to that, right? And I want to comment a little bit about this. You've heard me say about risk decision making here a couple of times, and one of the things that I find really important that's been changing in the industry, and this is common in some places, and other folks are really struggling here. As security becomes more of a risk management function, we also have to change the way we prioritize and deal with the activities in our work. So when we were seen as an operational arm of the IT group, right, we were just the people that deployed patches and configured firewalls, very tactical, right? And so there was sort of a finite limit to the things we could do. Did you deploy all the patches? Did you deploy all of the configurations to the firewalls? We could kind of quantify a lot of that. But when we move into a risk management focus, we're now talking about things like probability and likelihood. We recognize that we can't boil the ocean. We're not going to be able to get it all done, even if we had 80 hours, as was said by, I think Jake said. We're not going to. And so being able to prioritize and understand what's really the biggest risk in the organization, what's really the most critical asset, where are we really most at harm's way? And then let's sit down and talk about the best way to mitigate that as the collective business. It's a completely different kind of conversation, which is why we're having this talk today about how to have this different conversation. But we have to start to move away from this idea that we are purely tactical and we are only executing operational things. We need to move into a place where we're sitting down with the business stakeholders, the non-technical folks, and really approach this from a proper risk management standpoint. What is our risk tolerance? What is our potential appetite for absorbing risk? Do we have insurance? What are we doing for mitigation? How much do we want to spend to these things? It's a very, very, very different kind of way of approaching security as a whole than we've done in the past 15 to 20 to 25 years. So that's why we're here. Let me go ahead and jump in. I see there's a lot of conversation happening, but I'm going to comment about a couple of those things in a minute in part of the conversation. So hopefully that will answer some of the questions and comments coming up. So let's dive into the levels, and we'll talk a little bit about what they mean and some ideas around talking about it. So at the executive level, and really for CISOs especially, there's kind of a two-factored approach to what CISOs are dealing with here at this level. Ultimately, at the executive level, we are talking about making broad level business decisions. And if I'm looking at my risk posture, if I'm looking at my security program as a CEO or a CFO, general counsel, whoever, what I want to know is, as simply as possible, are we good or are we not? That's really it. I need to understand very quickly and easily at a high level, is the program working? Are we mitigating risk? Or is the program not working? And are we going to be in the next headline tomorrow morning because we're not doing our due diligence? Business leaders at this point don't need to get in the weeds, and they shouldn't. We should not be getting these folks in the weeds. The minute that you approach an executive level team with volume-based metrics around a security program is the minute you will lose them. I'll give you a good example of that. In one program that I ran, came on pretty early in my CISO career, and I did some vulnerability assessments. We found that at that time, there were about 300,000 open vulnerabilities in our environment. Pretty bad. So I pulled the team together, decided we were going to do a 1 month patching effort. We were just going to buckle down. I authorized overtime. We pulled the team together. We had a plan. We identified all of our high risk areas and we went at it. And in 30 days, my team was able to remediate 100,000 vulnerabilities. It's pretty significant for this organization. They'd never seen movement like that from a remediation standpoint. So I was pretty proud of this, I have to say. At the next executive level meeting, I sat down with the team and I said, hey, I want to report some massive progress in the security program. Month ago, we had this effort. We had 300,000 vulnerabilities in the environment that we identified. We pulled the team together. We fixed 100,000 of them. Massive, massive effort, and we're rolling here. This is a great progress. Now, any of you who've done this, you should be pretty impressed with this. I would hope, at least. 100,000 vulnerabilities fixed is no joke in a month, right? Want to take a guess about what was said? The general counsel looked over at me and said, "That sounds really good, but am I to understand you only did 1/3 of your job?" Well, yeah. Now that I think about it, I told him I only fixed 100,000 out of 300,000 things. To someone who doesn't understand the context or how hard that is, my team only did 1/3 of the job. And he wanted to know, why didn't you fix the other 200,000? It's a reasonable question. Now, this is a few years back. I think people are getting a little more savvy about cybersecurity stuff, but to me, it is always exemplified why you do not want to bring volume-based metrics to the table to these kinds of leaders. It's not what they're after. My team understands the value of fixing 100,000 vulnerabilities out of 300,000. That's massive. But that doesn't mean anything to someone who doesn't understand the context. So focus your metrics here on trends and time-based metrics. Use percentages. Make it simple, right? It needs to be quick and easy to understand. If that's a letter grade or if it's your classic stoplight colors, I don't care. Use what makes sense, all right, to the executives, and even ask them, do they like colors? Do they like letter grades? Do they like scores? People have preferences. It's okay to ask your executive team what they prefer, but get that correct, because if you get them caught in the weeds of this whole thing, they won't understand and they'll lose sight of the value you bring to the table. Stay away from volume. Keep it closer to the place where they can answer the question, are we good or are we not? That's all we really need to know, okay? Help them make better decisions about mitigating risk. Keep the data at that high level. And that's where we want to go from there. Okay. Any questions or thoughts from that conversation out there, Sean?
Quite a few.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been lighting up this chat. But some people just been saying, kind of deflating when you've worked that hard. Good story. Preach. Metrics and data has its place. But yeah.
Well, so one thing I might say about it's deflating the story. I think a part of it here is we have to remember to look at this from kind of outside our own personal biases. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a concept that I'm really fond of that a number of authors have written about called the curse of knowledge, or sometimes referred to as the burden of knowledge. Malcolm Gladwell writes about this in some of his books, which is where I came across it. For those of you who are not familiar, it's essentially this idea that when you are highly trained and educated and specialized in a particular field, you tend to see the world through the lens of that knowledge. And they talk about this commonly in like medical and legal professions, where somebody might come to a doctor and say, doctor, the front of my head really hurts. And the doctor immediately goes down okay, well, you might have a concussion, you might have an aneurysm happening, there could be cancer, they go down all these really crazy medical things. And they never bother to ask the question, like, well, why does your head hurt? And the person could say, well, I walked into a door. Right? We miss the simple answer and the truth of the situation because we have this specialized knowledge that we've built around. Security is not immune to this, right? We have an incredible amount of knowledge about this world. And so it is hard, right? It's very, very hard when you have this knowledge and you know the depth of the risk you're mitigating. You know that Log4j in some cases is absolutely horrifyingly bad. And by mitigating that, you did a great service to your organization. That's not always going to be clear to the people that don't carry that knowledge. And I think we have to, as practitioners and leaders, we have to kind of come to an understanding that not everyone will see the world that way, and that's okay. If we can at least help them understand the value of what we're doing in terms of, percentage gains or losses, risk mitigation numbers or trends, at least if they can see that we're doing good work, That's the benefit we want there, because then they will make decisions that keep supporting our efforts. We'll get those budget requests. We're going to get more people, and that's going to empower us to do better things with our teams. And that's the satisfaction we've got to do. So it's tough. And no single right answer to this, because every board is a little different. Every executive team is a little different. But try not to let that get you down. Just remember that we do see the world in a different way than a lot of the other folks do. And that's why we do what we do, because we're good at seeing the world that way.
And Dr. Blake Curtis brought up a good point. He said, I found that mapping your risks to their goals has been very useful. Highlighting how our security is an investment instead of expense seems to get the wheels churning.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in the very next thing. Yeah, this is all about alignment. This last point that I have here about, value is about demonstrating tangible business impact. This is where we're going. This is the goal of this whole conversation, is to be more aligned with the people that are not security folks, are not technical, right? Be aligned with legal, be aligned with finance, the business overall, help them understand what you're talking about in ways that matter to them. It changes everything in how you get things done. So let me jump into that. Let me talk a little bit about that. Because at the strategic level now, what we're really talking about here is making the decisions inside the security team about how well the program is working. All right. We make decisions all the time about the tools we implement, the processes we follow, the workflows that we use. But we have to make sure that these things are working, and more importantly, that they really are aligned with the business. And this is not always easy to do, but a lot of organizations don't even try, right? Many companies will implement security tools and never ask the business if that's going to be good or not. And we see this happen all the time, especially now with cloud environments where everything is moving so fast that security tools get implemented. And it's only after the fact that we learn that the development team has now had to stop business because the security tool is in the way and it's causing them obstacles. And it absolutely is slowing down the delivery of the new software updates or whatever the case is. That's a business impact. That's a problem. If security is getting in the way, you are not aligned with the goals of the business. So at the strategic level, we are getting a little bit more in the weeds, but what we're really looking for here is the program working effectively? Are we accomplishing the goals we set out to? And if not, what do we need to do in order to move the needle in the right direction? Now, one of the things, the exercises that I've often gone through when I'm trying to work with strategic level folks in this way is to say, well, look, you're trying to prioritize your remediation work. You're trying to decide how to report up the chain about business alignment. Do this. And I'd encourage any of you to steal this idea, what I'm about to say. So start with finding the engineer in your organization, the system administrator in your organization that's been around the longest, who knows the most about everything. And ask that engineer, what is the most critical asset in this organization? I guarantee you, he or she will have an answer. They always do. They always do. And they're going to tell you, it's right here. It's this database server right here. This one houses all of our customer data. That is our most critical asset. If that's compromised, it's game over. Okay, good answer. We have a server. Now we know. Step 2, go to the CFO and ask the CFO the same question. And the CFO is likely to give you a very different answer. They'll probably tell you something like, oh, well, our most important technology is, our asset is our e-commerce website, because that's where all of our business runs. If the e-commerce website goes down, we lose all our revenue. Our customers have no way to buy product from us. That's also a pretty good answer, right? That's an important business asset. If it goes down, it's a problem. Now, step 3, go back to that engineer and tell them what the CFO said. You're probably going to get some responses that I can't repeat here in good company about how stupid that person is, which they're not, of course, but the frustration will probably come out of that engineer. What are you talking about? The e-commerce website's not an asset. It's made up of 400 servers on the back end and 15 web applications with a bunch of load balancers, network equipment, and I got an Active Directory domain controller in there to manage it. I got all this stuff. What's he talking about? Yeah, that's the problem. That's why we're not aligned. Because the tactical folks are looking at the individual assets they have to manage. The business level, the executive level is looking at the business function. We, strategically in the middle, have to be the glue to align them together. And the trick here is it can be done. The data is there. It's a matter of how we organize the data, right? I can take all of the individual technology assets and put them into like a group. There's lots of ways to do this, but put them into a group and then report on that group, right? Report on the e-commerce website so that I can give a high level view of the risk to the CFO, but then I also have the individual components that I can take down to the tactical folks and get them more aligned with what's going on. So the data set is the same. How we give the data out, how we present it to each group can be different. But this is where at the strategic level, we want to start being the glue that holds all of this together. And how we present and twist that data to the right perspective is really, really critical here. Now, full disclosure, like I work for a company that does this kind of thing, but it's not the only way. There's plenty of ways that you can leverage this. But conceptually, this is what I want people to think about. Don't just make up the data. You have it. You've got the right data. But what you want to do is pivot that between business function, which could be made up of lots of different assets, and operational execution, which might be done by technology type or geolocation. It's not difficult to do that, but that's the pivot we want to do here at the strategic level. Now, one thing I want to highlight here as well. One of the biggest gotchas that I find security managers, team leads, people get caught in this level is when they're looking for outliers. Here's the thing, I have to get this through to all of you about this. When you're looking for outliers, do not just look for the problem areas in your environment. You have to, that's an important part of it, because if it's failing, you need to fix it. But do not shrug off where it is working well, because oftentimes that can be your key to success. To give that example, I worked for a auto finance company here in the West Coast. They are a global financial firm. They have about 110 representations in countries worldwide. Each country has to operate like its own bank for auto loans. And so they really have 110 complete separate business units that manage themselves independently. We built a program to help them understand how each organization was doing, how each country was doing. Nice little one-line graph of like the trend of their overall risk and their scoring systems, and a rough score of like how we would compare them. And the team was having some problems because they couldn't get movement from some of the really low scorers, the people that were not getting anything done. And I sat down with the team to go over this, and I asked the executive team, kind of what the problem was. And they said, well, let's go down the list. Look at Germany. Germany is like 12% compliance. They don't patch anything with an SLA. It's a disaster. We can't get them to do anything. We look over here at France, and they're doing the same thing. Terrible, 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 terrible. And I said, okay. I said, well, what's going on in Argentina? And the whole team looked at each other like I was crazy. And the CISO finally said, well, wait a second. Argentina is fine. They're our top performer. They kill it. They are at 97% compliance. They deploy their patches. They beat the SLA by over a week every month on schedule. We never have to worry about Argentina. Why are you asking about them? I said, but if they're doing it so right, what are they doing differently than everybody else that gets it done that fast? The organization had never asked. They had never looked into why that good outlier was so good. That's a problem. It's a big blind spot that you have to accommodate for if you're going to start to do this. And I'll give you the epilogue to this. We did ask Argentina what they were doing. Turns out that one of their guys down there had written a PowerShell script to automate some of the testing processes for deploying Microsoft patches early. So they were able to do their testing and piloting process within 24 hours each, which led to them automating the deployment process to their organization within 7 days. So when they had a 21-day SLA, they were able to actually get this done down into about 9 days or less killing the SLAs. And it was all done to this automation script in PowerShell they did. So it was simple, right? Well, once we found that out, it was like, great, let's take the PowerShell script, let's deploy it out to the other organizations, see if it's useful, which they did. And they found that in just about 60 days, they had a turnaround about just under 35% increase in compliance across the board globally for patch rates, SLA compliance, all the rest because of this automation. So it's really, really important. If you're going to look at risk, if you're going to look at how you can tell whether the program is working or not, you're looking for ways to tweak the program. Excuse me. Make sure you're looking for those positive outliers as well. And if it's working well, figure out ways to replicate that to other parts of your organization to help those folks make better decisions about mitigating all this risk. All right, I'll pause here before we get to the last level. Any questions or thoughts here very quickly that we've got?
Dr. Curtis had a good one. He asked, have you ever built your vulnerability management platform around the lines of business and the key services to better qualify risks to that business? This is something I haven't seen yet, but would love to see.
Yes, and I'll be honest. I mean, most of the vulnerability management programs I've built personally, I do both. Right? There's a kind of a top level framework that's all built around the business lines, so that I can look at them from the business perspective. How is this group doing? How's that group doing? This geolocation, whatever it is. But underneath of that, I have a subset of reporting and dashboards and whatnot that are aligned to the tactical folks, right? Because they don't always work in the same way, right? I might have a Windows management team that handles all of my Windows devices globally. They kind of don't care about the business lines. They just care about the technology. So I try very, very hard when I'm looking at data management and how I organize the structure of my VM efforts to do it in both ways. As long as I'm scanning or using my passives or whatever my sensors are, scanning's one of many, but agents, whatever it is. As long as I'm acquiring the data collectively, I can represent it however I need. And so, yeah, building it against the business line, I'm a big fan of doing that because it allows me to answer very quickly when the business says, hey, so-and-so complained about my organization. Am I really that bad? I've got it all ready to go. Say, yep, here's where your organization is. Here's where you got to focus. Here's the problem, so on and so forth. But that's not necessarily what the patch management teams want to hear or the operational folks. So I do both. I just don't necessarily reveal both to each of those groups. Hopefully that helps. Okay. The last piece before I show a quick example, I want to make sure that I'm not keeping everybody from all the beer. So getting to the tactical piece of this. Now, the tactical piece, this is pretty straightforward. All right. This is all about, how do we help the folks get it done better? They are your admins, your patch management folks, the tactical piece, the developers, everybody with their hands on the code. That's who we're at here. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this. You can read the slide. If we've done our work up at top, in terms of prioritizing workloads, we've aligned with the business, we're communicating where the risk really is. We're not trying to boil the ocean. We should be able to deliver pretty nice lists right to these folks. So we're not overwhelming them with, here's 300,000 vulnerabilities, go. Right? We should be able to say, here are the top 10 things I need solved today. Can you please solve it on these 200 systems, right? The more we can do that, the more likely that they're going to be able to do the work. Here's the point that I do want to focus on in this conversation, which is the alignment piece. I find in communicating risk up and down the organization, the tactical folks, the engineers are the ones who feel that they understand it best, but they are also the ones that understand it least. They see it only from the tactical level. They only see I know that I patched my Linux box. It's good. Why are you telling me it's not patched? Right? They see the risk at the technical level. We don't do a very good job of helping them understand how the work they do affects the business as a whole. And this is where the alignment of all this unification of data comes in really strongly. I have found that when I sit down with engineers and I talk to them about, look, the security team gave you a list of stuff to do. Why didn't you get it done? The number one answer I hear is, I already have a full-time job. And then these people come in, drop more work on my desk, and then they're going to go take credit for it when they go talk to the board, like that, like they're the ones who did the work. And I don't get my bonus from that. I don't get recognition. I'm not part of their team. So I'm not doing that. I'm going to stick to my full-time job. From a human kind of obstacle perspective, it is the number one reason I've heard commonly why engineers don't want to do it. All right. We have to help these folks understand how they are part of the puzzle. And I'm going to show you an example in just a minute of how you can do that. But when you can tie their work effort at the tactical level, all the things they deploy, every single thing that they patch or remediate, if you can tie that all the way back up to the executive level and say, hey, when we fix those 100,000 vulnerabilities, we actually were able to move the needle that you see 17% in the correct direction, and we have protected $12.5 million worth of revenue because we were able to mitigate risk on these incredibly critical assets within our e-commerce website. Now you're giving the executive level folks visibility to that. The tactical level folks are the ones that are actually mitigating the risk. Now, listen, it's not to say that we don't take our credit in the middle, but we don't want our partners at this tactical level putting us off because they think we're taking all the credit, stealing their thunder. They are absolutely team members in this whole process, and they have to be seen as contributing to mitigating risk. When they understand that their contributions matter, it's amazing how often the security requests start to get prioritized. So when you're talking about communicating at this tactical level, do all the other things here. Prioritize, automate as much as possible, make sure you're not overwhelming these folks, but help them understand how they contribute. Because if you can do that, that buy-in is powerful. And once they know that they're being recognized at the top level, it changes the whole conversation. So let me show you very quickly an example of what this all looks like, and then we can use whatever time left to have questions or conversations. I'm going to say here just for a moment, full disclosure. As I mentioned earlier, I work for a company that does this stuff. So what I'm going to show you is a sample of kind of a metrics plan from one of our tools. I want to emphasize, you can do this yourself. There are other ways to do this if you want to build it out. If you're using various BI tools out there, there's a lot of ways. This is the tool I have access to. I want to show an example of kind of how it's all structurally could work. But please feel free to leverage the tools you have at your disposal. I just want to make sure the concept of it all can be visualized. So this is a dashboarding tool we have in one of our platforms that's really trying to surface a lot of this information. But we structure it in this 3-level approach. At the very top, you've got an example here of an executive level sort of graphic. A very simple score that shows the overall health of the organization. It's a simple score. We use kind of a credit score method here. Easy to understand. It's color coded. There are trends next to it, so you can see over time, is it going up or down? It's simple, it's quick, it's easy. It does not get into the details of how many things were patched or where the problems lived. It's just a glance that the executive level can see and say, yeah, is it trending in the right direction, or are we trending in the wrong direction? Are we doing better than others in our industry? Are we not? Simple, easy, quick. That's kind of what you want. Below that, at the strategic level, this is kind of the bottom 2/3 of that, we start getting into process things, right? We start to get into areas of process. Is our assessment processes, are they working correctly? Are we assessing all of our assets, or are there areas we're blind to? Are we remediating fast enough? Are we remediating the right things? We can even break down the bottom, that same approach that I mentioned about doing the countries for that financial services firm. You can break out the different business groups or technology groups or geolocations, whatever, to kind of look at them and say, okay, where are my outliers? Who's doing well? Who's doing poorly? Someone's in the red. I need to find out why they need some help. If someone's in the green, what are they doing to make their score go up? We should be able to look at these and kind of compare who's doing what where. And all of that data feeds up to the top data. They don't need to know the details. It's just the same data to feed up to the top. And if I do want to drill in to one of these groups and try to understand what they need to do, what they need to accomplish, Then you get some really tactical data. And while there's a lot here, this is like a very prioritized look at the things that need to be fixed. This is actually just a top 20 list. It's not everything. But the key that makes this work, based on what we were just talking about, is that gray box kind of right in the middle. Because if I can bring this to a tactical person and say, listen, I don't want you to boil the ocean, but I need you to fix these 20 problems. This is what I need you to focus on. It's not on all 10,000 assets. It's on a limited, you can see the asset count there is in the middle. But more importantly, if you fix all these things, you will change the overall score the executives see. We call it the cyber exposure score, but that overall score, that credit score, by 42 points. As an operational person, as an admin, I now know if I get all this work done, then back here, that 579 in the upper left corner will drop by 42 points. I have direct impact on the risk levels of the organization that the executives can see. That alignment, as simple as that is, can be incredibly motivating for folks who are trying to do the right thing, want to make sure that they're getting their credit for the work that they do, and can see that it's being prioritized, right? We're not overwhelming them with thousands of things to do. These are 20 things that need to be done. And this is a constant cycle, right? We're going to do this as a process over and over and over again. But you can see how this is all the same data, right? All of the findings here are represented at the bottom by the groups, by the trend lines, are we doing okay? Which all feeds up to that top level score. This gets everyone talking about risk the same way. It gets everybody talking about the risk in a way that's meaningful to them, and it doesn't get them into an area that they don't care about. If I'm tactical, I don't care about the executive score. I care about how much work I got to get done. If I'm executive, I don't need to care about the number of vulnerabilities. It's all the same data, but we now have everybody aligned. And this is where, from a program standpoint, you really can accelerate maturity, because if I need to solicit buy-in at the high level for more budget, much easier to do. If I need more buy-in from the tactical folks that are matrix to get the work done, I have new tools to help me encourage them to do it. It's a starting point, but if we want to take the complexity of all those conversations down, get everybody looking at this stuff kind of the right way, this is one of the examples that you can leverage to try to do that. Again, no one single right answer, lots of ways to approach this, but I wanted to at least give you one visualization of what it could look like if you wanted to try to implement that. So,
Nate, thank you so much for leading this last session. What a great presentation. Thank you for everybody joining today, and take care.